G'day, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the second series of the History in the Bible podcast. More of the history in more of the books in all the Bibles. Episode 2.46, The Death of Jesus. In the last episode, I recounted the many trials and interrogations of Jesus. From all the Gospel accounts of the trials of Jesus, what can we say is dependable evidence? Christians hold the accounts of the interrogations and trial of Jesus in the Gospels as reliable history. The consensus of modern scholarship is that we must be non-committal. Some scholars say the interrogations and trials never happened. Most think that the Jewish participation in the trial of Jesus is a confused recollection of events now lost to us. We are uncertain as to what provoked Jesus' condemnation, on what grounds he was executed, and who executed him. The Gospels say that the Jewish establishment decided to put Jesus to death. They are vague in ascribing reasons. All the Gospels name the chief priests as leading the lynching. Some Gospels bring in the Pharisees, some the scribes, and some the Jews in general. Luke is most explicit about the accusations. He records that the chief priests and scribes charged Jesus with perverting the nation, forbidding Jews from paying Roman taxes, and declaring himself a king. John records that the chief priests are terrified that the Jewish people are turning against them. The people believe that Jesus is a legitimate Messiah because he raised Lazarus from the dead. The priests fear a popular revolt led by Jesus. The Gospels are confused as to the Roman role. Did Pilate condemn Jesus on his own knowledge and interest, or did he merely confirm a death sentence passed by the Jewish council? The Synoptics insist that the Romans executed Jesus. The Gospel of John holds that the Jews executed Jesus, with the permission of Pilate. We are perplexed by the elaborate legal process Jesus is subjected to. In a round robin of interviews, Jesus is interrogated and condemned by Ananias and Caiaphas, then by the council, then by Herod Antipas, and twice by Pilate. The Romans never responded to real threats with that sort of nonsense. They just sent out a cavalry troop to chop the rebels' head off. Simple days, simple days. You can regard the differences between the Gospel accounts as either petty or significant. Did the interrogation by the high priest and council occur in the evening, as Mark and Matthew have it, or the day, as Luke says? Luke introduces an interrogation by Herod Antipas, unknown to the others. John relates conversations between Jesus and Pilate, unique to that Gospel. The Gospels disagree about whether the events occurred on Passover or the day before Passover. The Synoptic Gospels describe Jesus as apprehensive, praying that the Father will save him. The Gospel of John describes Jesus as serene in his acceptance of death. Who witnessed the interrogations and trials? The disciples scarpered immediately after Jesus' arrest. They were not present at Jesus' interrogations by the high priest, by the Jewish council, by Herod Antipas, or by Pilate. Who recorded the words of all these people? When Jesus was scourged and mocked by the soldiers, which soldier spilled the beans to the evangelists? Hellenistic and Roman historians had no compunction in placing fabricated speeches in the mouths of their heroes. That was par for the course. Did the Gospel writers do the same, just make things up? The Gospels also say that Pilate doesn't care less about the Jewish charges. Our old friend, the Roman Jewish historian Josephus, recounts a similar case 30 years after Jesus' death. Long quote. There was one Jesus, the son of Ananus, who, when the city was in peace and prosperity, began on a sudden to cry aloud, a voice against Jerusalem and the holy house, a voice against the bridegrooms and the brides, and a voice against this whole people. Certain of the most eminent among the populace had great indignation at this dire cry of his, and gave him a great number of severe lashings. Hereupon our rulers brought him to the Roman procurator, where he was whipped till his bones were laid bare. But turning his voice to the most lamentable tone possible, at every stroke of the whip, his answer was, Woe, woe to Jerusalem. And when Procurator Albinus asked him who he was, and whence he came, and why he uttered such words, he made no manner of reply to what he said, till Albinus took him to be a madman and dismissed him. End quote. A serial pest has upset the temple authorities with his condemnations of the temple, and with his prophecies of doom. They attempt to bring him to his senses with some therapeutic lashing, then haul him before the Roman procurator. After a good sound whipping, the procurator dismisses the case. Not my problem, he says. The Gospels imply that Pilate desperately wants Jesus to be not his problem. Even when the Jews insist that Jesus is leading an insurrection to install himself as king of the Jews, Pilate is nonchalant. In the 2 or 3 centuries after the crucifixion, an entire literature emerged, exonerating Pilate from guilt and condemning the Jews. One of the most popular works was the Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as the Acts of Pilate. Here's a sample. Quote, And Pilate, filled with rage, said to the Jews, I take the Son, Saul, to witness that I find no fault in this man. And the Jews say to Pilate, What more will you hear of his blasphemy? Pilate says to the Jews, If these words be blasphemous, take him for the blasphemy, and judge him according to your law. The Jews say to Pilate, Our law bears that he that blasphemes God is to be stoned. Pilate says to them, Take him, and punish him in whatever way you please. The Jews say to Pilate, We wish him to be crucified. Pilate says, He is not deserving of crucifixion. What then shall we do to Jesus, who is called Christ? The Jews say, You are no friend of Caesar's, if you release this man, because he called himself king. You wish then this man to be king and not Caesar? And Pilate, in a rage, says to the Jews, Always has your nation been rebellious, and you always speak against your benefactors. End quote. Whatever actually happened at the trial, Jesus is sentenced to death, derided and flogged. On his head rests a crown of thorns, mocking his pretensions to the Jewish monarchy. He is taken to the place of execution, Golgotha, the place of the skull. Here is Mark. Quote, Mark 15:21. The Roman soldiers compelled a passer-by to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. End quote. Mark writes as though we are meant to know who Simon and his 2 sons are. Alas, they are lost to history. The Latin translation of Golgotha, Calvary, became the usual name in English and other languages. There is some argument as to the location of Golgotha. The Gospels call it merely a place. Later Christian tradition decided that Golgotha was a hill, beneath which was the skull of Adam. Today, the site is hallowed by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the Old City of Jerusalem. The church operates under the perpetually bickering administration of several Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church. The Gospel of John makes two big changes to the synoptic accounts. In the synoptics, Pilate reluctantly has his Roman soldiers crucify Jesus, and Simon carries the cross. In John, the Jews themselves conduct the crucifixion, and Jesus carries his cross. Luke has the longest account of the crucifixion. Here is the New Revised Standard Version translation. Quote, Luke 23:32. 2 others also were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. End quote. Am I missing something? Yeah. The famous sentence that you probably know best from the King James Bible. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. For all its poignancy, the sentence does not appear in the oldest papyri we have of the Gospel of Luke, nor in the early great codices, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. The sentence was added in early medieval times into the Greek manuscripts that the King James Bible relied on. I talked all about that in episode 2.17, Recovering the Bible, A Century of Revelations. The criminals, the soldiers casting lots for Jesus' clothing, the taunting. That all comes from Psalm 22. Most scholars agree that Psalm 22 was the inspiration for the details of the crucifixion scene. Here's a few verses from that psalm. Quote, Psalm 22:17. Dogs surround me. A pack of evil ones closes in on me. Like lions they maul my hands and feet. I take the count of all my bones while they look on and gloat. They divide my clothes among themselves, casting lots for my garments. But you, O Lord, be not far off. My strength hasten to my aid. End quote. Luke finishes his account of Jesus' death like this. Quote, Luke 23:39. One of the criminals kept deriding him. Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God? And we indeed have been condemned justly. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus replied, Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances stood at a distance, watching these things. End quote. Luke normally follows the Gospel of Mark closely. For reasons unknown, Luke omits a few key details from Mark. In this passage from Mark, Jesus quotes in Aramaic from Psalm 22. The Jews mistake Jesus' Aramaic call to God, Elohi, as a call to Eliyahu, the prophet Elijah. Quote, Mark 15:25. It was the 3rd hour in the morning when they crucified him. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Elohi, Elohi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, Listen, he is calling for Elijah. And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, and gave it to him to drink, saying, Let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, Truly, this man was God's son. End quote. Jesus' cry was later deployed by those Christian factions who believed that Jesus the man was a vessel used by God. They distinguished two persons, Jesus, the human child born to Mary, and the divine Christ created by God. Christ entered Jesus on his baptism. Jesus the man cried in anguish as the Christ departed him on the cross to return to God. In Luke, the centurion declares Jesus innocent. Mark has a much stronger declaration. The centurion affirms Jesus as the Son of God. This is a big statement from Mark. Earlier in his Gospel, Mark has demons hailing Jesus as Son of God, but no people. The centurion is the first person in the Gospel to acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God. To the accounts of Mark and Luke, Matthew adds another miracle. The dead rise from their tombs. The Gospels are confused as to the witnesses to Jesus' execution, although they all emphasize the role of women. Luke names no names. He mentions only Jesus' many acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee. The other Gospels hold that Mary Magdalene was present. The Gospel of Mark adds Mary, mother of the disciple James the Younger, and one Salome. In Matthew, the others are first, many women, then Mary, mother of James the Younger, and an unnamed woman the Gospel refers to as the mother of the important disciples James the Greater and John, better known as the sons of Zebedee. The Gospel of John is ambiguous. At first glance, John seems to say that 3 women were present: Jesus' unnamed mother, her unnamed sister, and Mary, the wife of Cleopas. John doesn't know the name of Jesus' mother. He never calls her Mary anywhere in his Gospel. Both the original Greek and its English translations are ambiguous. John's text could be read as saying that there were 2, not 3 women present: the mother of Jesus and her sister Mary, who happens to be the wife of Cleopas. 2 sisters named Mary does seem unlikely. One later church tradition took this otherwise unknown Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and turned her into the mother of the disciple James the Younger. John also uniquely says that apart from these women, one man attested to the death the beloved disciple. At this point in the narrative, in a sneaky verse, the Gospel writer says that he is the beloved disciple. Quote, John 19:35. He who saw this has testified, so that you also may believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. End quote. Jesus dies on Friday afternoon. The time is traditionally accounted as 3 p.m. Under Jewish practice of the time, he must be buried before the Sabbath begins at sunset. At that time of the year in Jerusalem, that would be about 6 p.m. The Gospels introduce a special surprise guest star, the hitherto unknown Joseph of Arimathea. He is a man of wealth and influence. He has only 3 hours to decently bury Jesus. He does so with efficiency. In those 3 hours, Joseph receives permission from Pilate to retrieve the body, wraps the body in linen, places Jesus into a new rock-cut tomb, and rolls a stone against the entrance. According to the Gospel of Matthew, the Jews convinced the Romans to place a guard, lest Jesus' followers steal the body and swindle the people into believing that Jesus has risen from the dead. Joseph of Arimathea is described as a member of the council that interrogated Jesus. It's a nice touch on 2 levels. First, the Gospels are signposting that Jesus has support at the highest levels of Jewish society. Second, the Gospels also give us a witness to the speeches made at the council. That still leaves us with no possible witnesses to the private interrogations by the high priests, Herod Antipas and Pilate. But there you go. Joseph achieved fame in later legend. It was said that he brought the Holy Grail to Britain. This was the cup that Jesus drank from at the Last Supper, and the cup into which Joseph captured Jesus' blood as he lay on the cross. And that is the last we hear of Jesus and the tomb, until Mary Magdalene and others find the sepulchre empty on the following Sunday, after the Saturday Sabbath. In the next episode of the History in the Bible, the resurrected Jesus appears to his disciples and ascends to heaven. See you then. Thanks for listening. For maps, charts, and diagrams, check out my website, www.historyinthebible.com.